Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really fiery chapter from Leonard Ravenhill's 1958 book, Why Revival Tarries. And the chapter's title, well, it tells you everything you need to know. Wanted, Prophets for a Day of Doom.
So Ravenhill doesn't ease you in. Nope, he opens with this incredibly intense image of the Apostle Paul, totally fearless, right on the brink of death. This right here, it sets the stakes sky high and gives us the standard of courage he's going to use to measure everything else.
So, to really get to the heart of the problem as he sees it, Ravenhill sets up this really stark contrast between two kinds of people, the ancient prophet and the modern preacher. This comparison is going to be the engine for his whole argument.
In Ravenhill's mind, the prophet has what he calls moral courage. They couldn't care less about popular opinion. They just speak the truth, no matter what happens. Think of Daniel in the lion's den. But the preacher, he argues they're more like performers. They have physical courage, sure, but they're worried about the crowds, about their reputation, and they're missing that fearless, world-changing spark.
And then he drops this line that just perfectly captures his whole critique. He says the church has swapped out its pillars for pillows. I mean, wow. It's just a devastating summary, right? Trading solid, foundational strength for comfort, softness, and ease.
All right, so from here, his critique of the church gets even bigger. He zooms out and starts diagnosing the spiritual state of the entire world. And let me tell you, it's a pretty bleak picture of the late 1950s.
He literally looks out his window at midnight, sees this velvet blackness in the sky, and uses that as a perfect metaphor for politics and morality. He sees a world that has just completely lost its way, stumbling around in what he calls gross darkness, with absolutely no moral compass left to guide it.
And this leads him to this really crucial question. You've got these big evangelistic events, you've got TV preachers, but Ravenhill's looking around and seeing no real spiritual awakening. So he asks, where's the real thing? Where's that powerful tornado-like revival that a world in this much trouble so desperately needs?
Now, to prove he's not just making grand, abstract statements, Ravenhill grounds his argument in a very specific case study, the state of the Methodist Church in England back in 1958.
He actually pulls this quote from a Methodist conference, and he says it was spoken almost with tears. This is a huge deal because it's an admission of failure from inside the church. That light of evangelism, which used to be this bright flame, is now just a flickering, dying candle about to go out for good.
And then he hits you with the hard data, 100,000. That's how many kids just stopped going to Methodist Sunday schools. In a single year. Suddenly, this isn't just some abstract idea of decline. It's a concrete, really shocking number that makes the crisis feel incredibly real.
And the bad news just keeps piling on. Overall church membership, it hit a 13-year low. The number of ministers, it dropped by a significant amount. For Ravenhill, this paints an undeniable picture of an institution that is in a serious crisis.
And to really drive the point home, he quotes the head of Methodism's home missions, a guy named Dr. Edwin Sangster. So now, this isn't some outsider just pointing fingers. This is a top leader on the inside, flat out admitting that their methods aren't working. They're up against a deep malady, and they have no idea how to fix it.
Okay, so after painting this incredibly grim picture, you have to ask, what's Ravenhill's solution? Well, he argues that this gentle, comfortable approach the church has been taking is obviously failing, and something way more radical is needed.
He says it as plainly as you can. The world doesn't need more popular preachers or slick speakers. It needs prophets. It needs men and women who are willing to speak the hard truths to a generation that he sees as just speeding towards disaster. The title of the chapter is literally his solution.
And his model for this kind of leader, it's not some polished speaker in a suit. It's a rugged, confrontational figure from the wilderness, John the Baptist. He's the perfect example of someone who is completely unafraid to offend powerful people or to challenge the way things are.
So what exactly makes these prophets tick? Well, first, they speak the truth without compromise, even when it's offensive. Second, they confront sin directly, even if it's in the highest corridors of power. And third, and this is so crucial, their motivation doesn't come from pleasing crowds, it comes from a divine source.
And here's where he brings it all full circle. Remember how the chapter started, with Paul's head basically in the lion's mouth? Well, it ends with a call to become the kind of people who don't just face lions, but who, through their faith and courage, can actually stop their mouths. It's an incredibly powerful call to action.
And that brings us to the final
piercing thought of the chapter. See, Ravenhill doesn't wrap things up with a nice little bow. Instead, he turns the mirror back on us, the readers, with one last very provocative question. He asks if, in a world that he sees as being enslaved by immorality, are we just going to be mesmerized spectators, just sitting back and watching it all happen? It's a challenge that just hangs there in the air, and it forces you to ask yourself, am I a pillow or am I a pillar? Am I just a spectator or am I a prophet?